Welcome to this video on the Time Tracker module for Dolibarr. Let's be honest, life is too short for manual tracking and invoicing of your most valuable asset, the time spent by your team. This module will help you save a lot of time and money by easily recording the time you and your team spend working on projects for your clients and by creating invoices for these services with a single click. In this video, I want to give you an overview of this module, and we want to start with the time tracking process. We want to have a demo on how the typical workflows for this tracking procedures look like. We have two options. The first option is time tracking for a specific customer with a specific project and task. And there are also situations where a time tracking for a specific customer but without a project and task is a good idea. And after that demos, you will see a summary of the main features of the time tracking process. The second aspect is invoicing, so creating invoices from that tracked time. And in the second part of this video, we will go much more into detail. You will see the general settings that are needed to use that module, and we have to deal a little bit about the roles and user permissions that are required for all these processes. And so we will show you in the demo how these tracked time intervals can be invoiced for a specific customer within a project, or the second part by creating invoices directly from the tracked time when no project is associated. And we will end with a summary of the main features of that second part of the invoicing process. So let's head over to the demo. Here I am logged in as a normal user who has the permission to use the time tracker. John is able to select a specific customer. Let's choose company ABC. And in the first example, I want to choose one of the projects that are associated with that customer. And there's also a task assigned for that project. It's a consulting project, and the first step might be to align the expectations of both sides. And before starting a project, we have to choose a specific description so we can remember what kind of work had been done during the time. So let's say we have an online meeting with a customer where we want to have basic communication about the project, and let's say that John starts the timer. So this is nothing special. There is a elapsed time that is shown here, and perhaps let's assume while John just started that meeting, there's an urgent call by another client, or let's say by the same client. Let's say that the same company calls in and wants to have a short communication. We don't choose a specific project for that, so we just give a description. That's a call, and we start a timer. A second timer. We have not finished actively the first timer, but you see it stopped. Of course, John can only work on one specific project at a time, or on one specific task at a time. He can't record his time for two different activities, not for the online meeting as well as the call. So whenever another timer is started, the first timer or all other active timers are in a pause state. You see that there is a play button. So if the second timer that was started after that first timer is stopped, so let's say we say that this call is over now, and we can have a look at the details when the timer was started, when it was finished, the elapsed time and the total time. We can get back to our online meeting, and we can go on. We restart the initial timer, and we can have a look at the details. We have a second, we call them sub-timers, so we have a second time interval. Now it's 12 seconds within that second timer, and we both see the elapsed time for that restart as well as the elapsed time for the total time. So in that demonstration, you have seen many aspects of the of our time tracking module. One aspect is also indicated by this edit button here. So just imagine that we had forgotten to stop a specific timer, or we had started the timer too late. We are 10 minutes within the task and we remember that we forgot to start the timer. So we may have the option to correct this afterwards. Let's say initially we had not stopped at that time, but 1 minute earlier. We save that, and we see now that's 1 minute more of elapsed and total time for the first part. The currently active timer doesn't have an edit button. Sure, during the activity of the running timer, there's no option to edit that. So in this demonstration, you saw many of the features that we have implemented in our timer. Let's get back to the presentation to summarize those properties. Our module can handle multiple tracking timers, both for an individual user as well as for different users at the same time. Each tracking timer is associated with a specific customer. That's a mandatory condition. You can't start a timer without assigning a specific customer, but you can optionally choose a project and task for that tracking timer. The idea is that sometimes you have in a specific project you work on. You saw that we have a specific consulting project. You spend time on that project and on a specific task especially, and that can be associated very directly. But there are situations like a call coming in where you don't want to create a project just for that call, but you want to record the data and to being able to create an invoice later for that time you spent by speaking with a customer. So there's an option not to start a project and not to create a project and task, but just to start a timer for a specific customer. Tracking timers can be paused and restarted, and for each moment the user can track the time for exactly one tracking timer, and that means that starting a tracking timer or restarting a tracking timer puts all other tracking timers for that user in the pause state. And tracking timer data, start and end time, and the duration can be edited. And the background is, I talked about that before, it might be that a user forgot to start the tracking process at the right time, or he forgot to stop the timer. So the timer is still running, although the job is finished, or although the call is finished for a longer time. So there is an option to correct that. And there's also a general setting that the admin of the Dolibarr system can set. There's an option to set the maximum number of hours. The background is that, for example, if you leave your office and tracking timer is still in progress, then perhaps a maximum number of, let's say, 8 hours can be set, so the timer is finished automatically. We have realized that by using a cron job. Cron job runs in a specific interval, and you can look at currently active timers that are running for a longer time than the given maximum number of hours. Now we are turning to the second part of the time tracking module, the invoicing. And we need to talk about some general settings that must be set before using the module. First one, I told you already, there is a timer limit in hours that protects against forgotten tracking timers, and the cron job stops those processes. And there need to be some default billing settings. The background behind that is that we have an automatic creation of invoices. For example, at the end of the month, you can create an invoice for all the time spent for a specific customer by different users, by different co-workers of your company. And if you create those invoices automatically, you need some kind of billing settings. Usually the billing settings like payment options, payment plan is given for a specific customer in the settings of that customer, but if no billing settings are given for that customer, we have some kind of default settings in our module settings. If we turn to the module settings for the time tracker module, you see that the first setting is the timer limit in hours. I choose 8 hours, so if someone starts a specific time tracker on the beginning of his workday, after 8 hours it should be finished. Second part is the billing settings. Here we have different options to say, let's say within 14 days the invoice should be paid, and we accept bank transfer as the default. But we need other settings as well. We need to have some settings for a project. A project must be validated, and especially bill the time spent is set. And the users that are working on that project must also be associated in the Dolibarr settings to that project. So if we want to create a new project for that third-party customer, let's call it new project, very creative, set the bill the time spent option and create that project. This project will not show up under the list of projects unless we validate the project. In that case, we have the option to choose that new project for time tracking. Now, if you look at that validated project, the third part was to look at all people that work on the project are associated with the project. So we click at contacts of project and we see that only the super admin is associated, but we want to let John Consultant work on that project. So we add him, and from now on he's able to choose that project and track the time for that project as well. Final setting that needs to be done, or that needs to be checked at the beginning before using the module, is the services and user settings. So if we want to create invoices automatically from the time tracker data, then we have to associate a specific time the user spent on a project with a specific amount of money. So we need to have a default service that is associated to that user. So the default service contains the price per hour, for example, and the tax rate. And if we know that a specific user spent 2 hours on a specific project and we create an invoice, then we use the default service for that user, and we know how much money can be associated with that invoice. Let's have a look at these settings. For that purpose, we need to look at the list of users. We see that John Consultant is listed here, and on the right side our module adds a specific extra field that's called default service for invoicing in time tracker. And here we see that if we go in the modify part, we see that we had chosen this consulting service as the default service for invoicing in time tracker. These services are defined in a specific setting, products and services here, and you see that the consulting service is associated here. You see that there's a specific selling price, 100 euro per hour, and there's a specific tax rate, and this is sufficient for the automatic process to create an invoice from the tracked time. Now that we've seen the general settings for using the time tracker module, you have a good idea about the different roles and the different user permissions. The standard user, as you've seen with John, only sees his own tracking timers. Time tracking for a specific customer and with specific project and task. This is the situation you saw before. John recorded a specific time working on a consulting project, and the project must be validated. Bill, the time spent is set. You saw that in the before, and the user John is assigned to the project and task, and then it's easy for him to add the data to the project. You saw that there's a button called Add to Project, and if the timer is stopped, there's an option to transfer the data from our time tracking module to the project. Let's have a look at that process. Meanwhile, the time elapsed on that project for company ABC in the consulting project, and the alignment of expectations has elapsed about 24 minutes and 30 seconds. So let's say that this consulting job is done and John stops the timer. And here you see that after stopping the timer, there's an option to edit the data, as you saw before, but the main aspect here is to add the data to the project. Let's do that. Timer data were added to the project is the feedback, and if we turn to the project, and it's the consulting project, we can have a look at the time spent, and you see that this 23 minutes and 2 minutes that we had been working on the project are added as additional lines. In this listing, there is no automatic creation of invoices. The background is that you might not want to create invoices automatically in that case, but perhaps to create an invoice if a specific milestone within that project is reached. So let's say the two last time tracker data should be the basis for a new invoice. Then you would select those two intervals, and now you would create an invoice. This is a little bit outside of our module, but it's the standard way of creating invoices from time spent data. We want to add data and duration into the line description, and we choose a specific service for that, and now we create an invoice. A new invoice has been created, and if we have a look at this invoice, we see that they have two lines for the consulting service, a specific, and you see the details, when was the starting of that. Okay, so now let's turn to the second case where we have a time tracking without a specific project and task, but for a specific customer. You saw the example as, for example, a call is coming in and you don't want to create a specific project just for a call. But these time tracking instances where you don't have a specific project associated, they should not be invoiced by the user who performed the service. The idea is that such calls may come in every 2 days, and you don't want to create an invoice for each of these calls separately. So perhaps some kind of admin within your company or some department for invoicing might be responsible for creating that invoice, and so they might need a specific permission to do that, and they should be able to collect the data from all such tracking timers without a project. So we have implemented a procedure to create invoices in one step across all finished tracking timers for a specific customer. Let's say, for example, at the end of the month. We are now logged in as the super admin, and we can have a look at the different permission settings. Let's look at the permissions for John. He has the option to permission to look into the third-party data. He can have a look at the invoices. He can look at project that's required for being able to use the module as well as the services. But the specific time tracker permissions are not given for him. And they are The first option is the user allowed to create invoices from time tracker data? John is just doing the work for that customer. He's not allowed to do the automatic creation of invoices, as well as is not allowed to see the time trackers of all other users. But I'm now logged in as a super user who has the permissions. Let's look at the list of users and look into the admin and on the permissions, and here these two permissions are given. Now if we look at the time tracker module again, as a user that has the permission to see all timers of all users and to create invoices, we can click the button create invoices to automatically create the invoices across all those tracking timers for a specific client. We have the same client, company ABC, here. So if we click the button create invoices, we have an automatic creation of invoices. And as both users have all the services associated, we get the feedback that one new invoice is created. We go to the billing and payment part, and we see that there's a new invoice for company ABC, and we see that both the work on design and on consulting are both added to that invoice. And across the different users and across the different tasks they performed within their tracking time interval, they are all collapsed in one invoice. And now the usual process to create a document from that data can be added, and the individual time, the starting time and the duration for both these time intervals is given and can be shown in the invoice as well. So let's get to the summary of the invoicing process. There are two cases. In case that the project and the task had been assigned, there is an add to project button that adds the time spent to the associated project. That can be done by the user who performed the work for that project. There's no automatic billing process triggered by that, but afterward, during the invoicing for the project as a whole, these time tracking data can be used. The different situation is if a project is assigned but no task is assigned. We haven't given examples for that in the demo, but we might as well collect the time tracking for a specific project of a specific customer. That's also done by the create invoices button. And similar to that is the case where we have no project and no task assigned. You saw that if a user with a specific permission clicks that create invoices button, all the time trackers for a specific customer are collapsed into one invoice, and a new invoice is created. The create invoice procedure can only be performed by user with corresponding permissions. It requires an assigned default service for invoicing for every user who uses the time tracking module. And we also need the default payment settings of the customer as given by payment terms, payment method, etc. I haven't shown that the relative and absolute discounts for a customer are taken into account as well. So if, for example, you have given a 5% reduction of the price for a specific customer because it's a long-term relationship with that customer, then these are given in the customer settings and they are taken into account when creating the invoices automatically. So I hope this video has given you a good overview of the process. I hope you will save a lot of time and a lot of money by using the time tracking module. Happy time tracking for you. Bye bye.